The Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler, February 12th, the 7 Holy Founders of the Order of Servites. In a period of 2 years, from 1225 to 1227, 7 young Florentines joined the Confraternity of the Blessed Virgin, popularly known as the Laudesi, or the Praisers. It was a time when the prosperous city of Florence was beset by political turmoil and disturbed by the heresy of the Cathari. It was also a time of general moral relaxation, even where dovish practices were still preserved. These young men, members of the most important families of the city, since their childhood had been occupied more with spiritual than temporal affairs, and had not taken part in local strife. It is not quite clear whether they were already friends before associating with the Laudesi, but in such fellowship they became intimately allied. Every day these 7 men became more detached from the world and more devoted to the service of the Blessed Virgin. The eldest of them all was Bonfilio Monaldo, who became their leader, and the others were Alexius Falconieri, Benedetto del Antella, Bartolomeo Amide, Ricovero Uguccione, Gerardino Sosteni, and Giovanni Buonaggiunta. They had as their spiritual director James of Poggibonsi, who was chaplain of the Laudesi, a man of great holiness and spiritual discernment. All of them followed the call to a life of renunciation and determined to have recourse to Our Lady in their distress. On the Feast of the Assumption, when they were absorbed in prayer, they saw Our Lady in a vision, and she inspired them with the desire to withdraw from the world and live in a solitary place for God alone. There were difficulties because, although 3 of them were celibate, 2 were married and 2 were widowed, both of whom had impediments. It was necessary to provide conveniently for those who depended on them, but that was arranged, and with the bishop's approval, they withdrew from the world. They went to a house called La Carmarzia, outside the gates of Florence, 23 days after they had received the call. Their desire was to lead a life of penance and prayer, but before long the continual Florentine visitors began to distract them, and so they decided to retire to the deserted, jungle-like slopes of Monte Senario, where they built a simple church and hermitage in which they led a life of almost unbelievable austerities. Despite the difficulties in finding them, visitors kept coming to the hermits and many wished to join them, but they refused to accept recruits. Thus they continued to live for several years until they were visited by their bishop, Ardingo, and Cardinal Castiglione, who had heard much about their holiness. The latter was greatly edified, but made an adverse criticism. "Your way of life," he said, "is too much like that of the jungle creatures of the forests as far as the care of the body is concerned. You treat yourselves in a manner bordering on barbarism, and you seem to desire more to die to time than to live for eternity. Be careful. The enemy of souls sometimes hides under the guise of an angel of light. Listen to the advice of your superiors." The 7 were deeply impressed by these words and hastened to ask their bishop for a rule of life. He replied that the matter required prayer and begged them not to continue to refuse admission to those who sought to join them. Again the solitaries went into prayer for light, and again they had a vision of Our Lady, holding in her hand a black habit, while an angel held a scroll with the title, Servants of Mary. Our Lady addressed them and told them that she had chosen them to be her servants, that she wished them to wear the habit and follow the rule of St. Augustine. From that date, April 13th, 1240, they became known as Servants of Mary, or Servites. In accepting this rule, the 7 founders had to adopt a different way of life, which gave much satisfaction to their former friend, the Bishop of Florence. James of Poggibonsi, who had followed them, resolved to join them. They received the habit at the hands of the bishop himself and chose Buonfiglio as their superior. In accordance with custom, they chose their religious names, by which they would henceforth be known. These names were Brothers Bonfilio, Alejo, Amadeo, Hugo, Sostenes, Maneto, and Buonaggiunta. At the desire of the bishop, all except St. Alexius, who in his humility begged to be dispensed, prepared to receive holy orders, and in due time professed and were ordained priests. The new order, whose form was more like that of the mendicant friars than that of the monastic orders, increased surprisingly, and in a short time it was necessary to found new houses. The first sites chosen were Siena, Pistoia, and Arezzo, and later houses were established at Carfagio, the convent and church of the Santissima Annunziata in Florence, and the convent at Lucca. Although the Servites had the approval of their immediate superiors, they had not been recognized by the Holy See. Again and again, efforts were made to obtain recognition, but those who wished to see the new order abolished or absorbed by another made difficulties. The Lateran Council had declared that no new orders should be founded, and later the Council of Lyons had added still further limitations. Whenever the petition of the Servites reached the Pope, it was either set aside or ignored. It was not until 1259 that the order was practically recognized by Alexander IV, and it was not until 1304, more than 60 years after its foundation, that it received the explicit and formal approval of Blessed Benedict XI. Saint Bonifacio had remained prior general until 1256, when he begged to be relieved due to his advanced age. He died a very beautiful death in the midst of all his brothers on New Year's Eve, 1261. Saint Boniunta, the youngest of the seven, was the second prior general, but expired in the chapel shortly after his election, while the Gospel of the Passion was being read. Saint Amadeus governed the important convent of Carfagio, but returned to Monte Senario to end his days. Saint Menetus became the fourth prior general and sent missionaries to Asia, but soon retired to yield the post to Saint Philip Benizi, on whose breast he expired. Saint Hugo and Saint Sosthenes went abroad, Sosthenes to Paris and Hugo to found convents in Germany. They were called in 1276, and having fallen ill, they died side by side the same night. Saint Alexius, the humble lay brother, outlived all the others and was the only one who lived to see the order in full force and definitively recognized. It is said that he died at the age of 110.